Good morning, everyone, all my friends, dear people. I'd like to thank you for taking the time and paying your own way, and for your years of paying for your own research. You're going back and forth across the country speaking. I'm looking at Samuel Blumenfeld in particular right there, Cindy Weatherly, Beth Trotto, all my old research friends. You've got Kelly Nelson, Polly Anglin. These are our Bettina Dobbs, who I worked with we were considered very kooky, right, Bettina? In the 70s. Anybody who knows what's going on is considered a kook. And so I always say when they call me one, thank you. We're in good company with people like Solzhenitsyn, and you can go on and on and on with the great patriots across the world who were considered crazy. I wonder if there are any others. I forgot there's some new people on board here, and I'm very happy to see them as well. I hope I haven't forgotten. Oh, Mary Thompson is there. Probably not the oldest person. She's probably vying with me. But Mary, I think, has probably been involved longer than any of the ones I've mentioned. And she'll be speaking to us in regard to the origins of the system, the planning, programming, budgeting, management system out of California. She was there, and she went up against it at the legislature, and she wrote a marvelous article that's in my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. So I want to thank you all, and I hope you understand how important you are. We are the remnant. We don't get paid. We're not with a tax-exempt foundation. We don't work with George Soros. We don't work with Rupert Murdoch. And I could go on and on. We don't work with William Bennett. We don't work with the neoconservatives because they are the Trojan horse at the moment. They are introducing the charter schools, the school choice, and we have to understand that although many of them may not understand what they're doing, they are the Trojan horse to change our form of government, believe it or not, through unelected councils. The unelected council system, very important. That's the Soviet system. They start with charter schools, which is a large hunk of our economy, education. They can move into charter schools as school choice, and it's a huge amount of money that's going to be involved there. When you've got that part of our economy controlled by unelected boards, what's to keep Americans from saying, oh, well, hey, why do we have to have a county commissioner elected? Finally, why do we have to have a state legislature? This is just great. And a lot of Americans now are so upset, rightfully so, they're going to say, oh, well, I can't stand my elected officials. I mean, who could be worse? Don't let it happen. Don't let charter schools happen. You've got to stop them across the board. And we have marvelous people here today who are going to explain this. Pat Hoff, and he's been in education for 35 years. We've got other people who understand this, Cindy Weatherly, Mary Thompson. A lot of our conference is going to be dedicated to that very issue of school choice. Did we ever dream that that would be the case? Let me give you a good quote from a top person in education, way up high. At the top, the NEA is in bed with the international, Rockefeller and all of them, at the top. The teachers themselves do not have the faintest, most of them, what is going on. Now, Marjorie Liddell, you may never have heard of her, but she's a very close associate of William Spady, who gave us outcomes-based education, which is Skinner. That's direct instruction, which the conservatives insist is not Skinner. It is Skinner. We have boxes and boxes and boxes of research on direct instruction. It's Skinner. It's Pavlov. It's Skinner who said, I can make a pigeon a high achiever by reinforcing it on a proper schedule. This system went into the District of Columbia schools in the 80s. There's a wonderful article in my book. It's on my son's website, AmericanDeception.com, Washington Post, where this assistant superintendent said, if you can get a pigeon to fly up there and drop a bomb, why can't we do the same thing with the Mastery Learning Direct Instruction program? That's what's going in. Our people know. So anyway, this is very important. I'm going to now read from the basic book here. Thank heavens for Carnegie. Sometimes they make it easy for me. The Carnegie Corporation is deeply involved in what we're looking at today and has been since at least 1934. They, at that time, decided, they had all of these educators who'd been back and forth to the Soviet Union, that our system didn't work. We needed to change America to a planned economy. So they put together this little book, Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies. Report of the Commission on the Social Studies, the American Historical Association. And the staff were Mr. Craig, George Counts, who many of you may have heard of, Mr. Kemmel and Kelly. There were 4, I believe, who refused to sign off. The rest of the Commission on Direction is, I'm not going to read all these. You can find this book, which is great. It's on my son's website at americandeception.com. Type in conclusions into the search engine. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is page 16. It's an incredible book. A professor of British socialism referred to it as a call for a socialist America. And I'm going to read from page 16 and 17. It says, under the molding influence of socialized processes of living, drives of technology and science, pressures of changing thought and policy, and disrupting impacts of economic disaster, sort of like now, they're using the same thing, right? There is a notable waning of the once widespread popular faith in economic individualism. And leaders in public affairs, supported by a growing mass of the population, are demanding the introduction into economy of ever wider measures of planning and control. 9, cumulative evidence supports the conclusion that in the United States, as in other countries, this is 1934, okay, think about it, right after the Depression, interesting. The age of individualism and laissez-faire in economy and government is closing, and that a new age of collectivism is emerging. This is a little sentence here. I'm not going to go on much more. It's unbelievable, unbelievable book. But this just says, in any event, the Commission is convinced by its interpretation of available empirical data that the actually integrating economy of the present day is the forerunner of a consciously integrated society in which individual economic actions and individual property rights will be altered and abridged. All right, now this is the key, the jewel. Since then, Carnegie Corporation, every 5 years, they've made it really easy. I always say it's like, what is it, Hansel and Gretel that go to visit grandma or something and they drop the breadcrumbs? Well, Carnegie did that for all of us. Huh? Every 5 years, they have funded, tax exempt. Our money has gone into testing, the NAEP, National Assessment. It's gone into the Education Commission of the States, which was a regional entity which allowed a central office in Denver to have a legislator from each state legislature, the Education Committee, serving on that, 50 of them. They would take the draft legislation back from Denver and implement it around the country. That's why we have people talk about standards. It's a joke. I mean, that's a diversion. That's part of my 7-pronged fork. The standards, the main common core and all that is just a diversion from what I'm telling you today, which is the Carnegie Plan. I mean, do our people really think that once you get those wonderful standards that actually came out of my office anyway, you're just choosing from what they've chosen, that the Commissioner of Education, Superintendent, whatever he is, Arne Duncan right now, he's going to get a message from UNESCO or the UN saying, change the standards. And the next morning, with a computer, push a button, every state has their standards changed. I don't know why our people have wasted 3 or 4 or 10 years on standards. It doesn't make a bit of difference. Do you trust the Department of Ed? Do we really trust my old office? Oh, you shouldn't trust my old office. You should see some of the documents that came out. One of them, Project BEST, Better Education Skills Through Technology. You know what it said in there? What we can control and manipulate at the local level. It says task force members, content of curriculum, etc. Everything. Okay, so just remember that don't get diverted from the major problem, which is international control through computers of all of us, as Orwell said. Our governor is in bed with the Heritage Foundation and pushing the charter schools. And the Heritage Foundation, believe it or not, this wonderful conservative group that gets all the old ladies in tennis shoes, just like me, to send big bucks to them, drafted the North American Free Trade Agreement. How many people know that? Well, no wonder we have hundreds of thousands of jobs gone out of this country because of Heritage. Now, are we going to follow Heritage down that path to charter schools, which is going to give us the Soviet Polytech workforce training system? Of course that's what Heritage wants. Look, you've got Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, here on the left. We'll call him a leftist, right? And you've got, and he calls for school choice in charter schools, right? You've got Heritage Foundation, all the neoconservatives who tell me I don't know what direct instruction is and we got to have direct instruction. Sure we do, because that's school to work. That's Skinner, okay? So we got on the right, we've got Heritage Foundation, all the neocons pushing school choice, charter schools, and guess who we have in the middle? We have our old friends, our good buddies, Rockefeller, etc., Council on Foreign Relations. They are supporting school choice. Now, if I stopped right now, you wouldn't have to have any more information from me, basically. So we have no friends except ourselves. And we are the remnant, and we are going to do something about this situation by making it go global. Because I know my office in the U.S. Department of Ed funded multi-million dollars going abroad to not just wasting our tax money on our own stuff, all over the world, wasting our tax money, sending to UNESCO in Hamburg. Let me point out right now, this is a UNESCO program I'm talking about today. It's a United Nations program. I don't have the latest statistics, but the leading advisors for UNESCO were either Russian communists or Eastern European communists. Now, all 20, all. Think about it. That is where our curriculum is coming from. We're putting in the Soviet system. Now, you've all heard about Norman Dodd. I think most of our people have. Norman Dodd, the research director for the investigation of the tax-exempt foundations in 1953. He's a marvelous man. I knew him. I met him in Georgetown in Washington in 1981 over dinner in a restaurant. I had never heard the story before. And I really didn't want to finish my meal. He told me about how he had to go up to New York as part of the investigation of the tax-exempt foundations and to meet with Rowan Gaither, the president of the Ford Foundation. And he was told by Rowan Gaither that the foundations received their instructions from the White House. That was Dwight Eisenhower at the time, but they'd been getting these instructions ever since World War II. Oh, it came through OSS, had a lot of involvement in this as well. So the instructions were to change America through all their tax funding, which they continued to do, like Carnegie I was talking about every 5 years, change America so it could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, people will say, oh, but the Soviet Union's dead. Communism, no, not at all. It was all planned. We know that. We've got Anatoly Golitsyn's book, New Lies for Old. We've got the proof from the former Soviet officials who were involved in the planning of the phony fall. So, but they had to have that happen because they had to get rid of that enemy to have a new enemy. So then we have terrorism now. We've got the new enemy. And it's constantly moving us forward, keeping Americans terrified of whatever enemy we create in order to move forward. That's the dialectic. You know, create the problem, people scream, impose a solution. So anyway, Norman Dodd told me that. You can imagine, I mean, I really didn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that such a thing, even though I had worked in the State Department and Soviet affairs. My background is Department of State and U.S. Department of Ed and local school board member. I'd lived all over the world for 20 years, and I'd seen what went on in Vietnam and China and the torture and everything else, but I still couldn't believe that the United States had a plan to merge with the Soviet Union. Now it's China too. So we have all these agreements with the Soviet Union, with China, et cetera, that call for a merger of our educational system. It's all school to work. It makes it easy for you. You don't have to worry about, math and science. That's the Soviet system. That's the STEM program. There's a good article in my book that was, that I think it's also on my son's website, American Deception. These educators who went to the Soviet Union in 1959, they were sent there by the Commissioner of Education at that time, Jurtik, and they came back. We've got the report, and it's an absolute identical agenda to what's going in the United States right now. And at that time, I'll tell you what it is. It's Pavlov, it's Darwin, it's learning technology, engineering, science. It's no grades, no competition. You read that, that's what's going in right now. Now, Norma Dodd knew that. A lot of people involved in many of the investigations in Congress, they were called before Congress, communists in the education system. They knew it. Bella Dodd knew it. That great book, School of Darkness by Bella Dodd, who was head of the Communist Party in New York City, at the education section. So I hate to tell you this, this is what's going in. And there's no question in our mind. We researchers sat there yesterday with the boxes that were used, of research used for my book that I finally opened up after 10 years. I had them in the barn. And we just went, oh, especially about Skinner. Especially about books like this, out of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. This is all direct instruction. This talks about Thaddeus Lott in Houston, the direct instruction, that our conservative change agents, we call them, like Donna Garner, are telling everybody Charlotte's wrong. It's not Skinner. Direct instruction is pure phonics. No, teach our children well using Skinner, Pavlov, operant conditioning, rewards, punishment. So they're really not right. But they've been so successful that maybe we wouldn't have had this conference if they hadn't been so successful, because I keep going after Skinner. Once we allow this to happen, not just to our children, but in our communities with community-oriented policing system, where they give community people rewards. Once we allow it, we're going to be nothing but animals to be trained. And we will have no conscience, no soul, no thinking, no nothing. We will be, as C.S. Lewis said, he said, once training beats education, civilization dies. He wrote The Abolition of Man. He understood this. We are dealing with something more important than anything we've ever dealt with before in this country. We've lost hundreds of thousands of men in wars abroad. For what? To end up merging with a communist, atheist system that believes that man is an animal. And it's being spread all around the world. We're making sure, I remember Goodlad, he was all over the world, John Goodlad, major change agent, trying to change the classical education system that they had all over. This was Thailand I'm talking about. Had a hard time in Germany getting rid of it. But this has been going on for about 50 years. We've got all the research. I'm going to talk about this because this is homeschoolers who better watch out. In my old office in the Department of Education, I was senior policy advisor in the United States Department of Education, Office of Educational Research and Improvement. And let me point out that I had no reason to be there credentially-wise, but they were going to get rid of the department. Remember Ronald Reagan promised that? He could have done it. Don't you let all those neocons tell you he couldn't do it. I knew he could do it. He allowed the firing of one of the finest educators I've ever known, Ed Curran, the head of the National Institute of Education. When Ed Curran recommended his own office be abolished, Reagan allowed him to be fired. But anyway, when I was in the department, usually it would be the head of Columbia University or Stanford who would be in my office, my job. So I had access to everything, all the old plans and all the new. And folks overseas who are watching this, you're getting absolutely everything we've got, because this is an international global curriculum that is on the computer, and there can be no deviation from it, and it's lifelong learning. It will be under the umbrella of the school district, run by unelected councils. And I'm going to point out right now, we have someone in the audience who told me about 20 years ago, and I never forgot it, that she went to a community education conference in Washington, D.C., and it was not, most of you don't even know about community ed because they don't call it that anymore because we got onto them. Remember, Bettina? We caught them in Maine, and we stopped it here. That is, community ed is it's been planned for years by Mott Foundation in Michigan. It started out. And that is putting all services, leisure, health, everything you ever heard of, even taking grandma to look at the leaves in the autumn, under the umbrella of the unelected school district. And that's lifelong. And it's all computers, etc. So when I read this to you, I'm going to give you a little quote from the head of the Office of Libraries and Learning Technology in my office, Malcolm Davis, very nice guy. In 1981, he showed me computer courseware for mathematics, NEA curriculum. And I said to him, Malcolm, gee, that's great. You know, you don't even have to go to school for that. You could have that at home. And he said, Charlotte, in the future, all education will take place in the home with a computer. And I thought, well, yes, but he said, the school will always be used for socialization purposes. That's the brainwashing end of it, right? And all of us, not just students, all of us under the umbrella of school is subjected constantly to brainwashing. Now, here is under the Bush administration, I think it was Lamar Alexander, I'm not sure what year this was, it was the New American School Development Corporation that was set up with these, which was a public-private partnership again, which no accountability if you have a public-private partnership. The best you can call it is corporate fascism, right? That came under Reagan, the White House. I served as a liaison with that group in the White House, and I asked them, what are you doing? And they said, well, I said, isn't this corporate fascism? Oh, I don't think we ever looked at that. That was when our system broke under Reagan with Ed Meese, Weinberger. They set up the public-private partnerships ostensibly, well, what they said was, we've got to get rid of the free enterprise system. That's a Washington Post article. We've got to go the way of Japan. So that was under Reagan, too. So here we are. This is the result of it for homeschoolers. It says, the New West Learning Project. Linking resources using innovation and technology. And it says in the middle, the New West Learning Center, and then you have private schools, homeschool, alternative schools, and higher education, public schools. In the middle is the center, the control, and it's all controlled by computer. When we're talking about computers, that means that lifelong, the data collection, you know it. I think Rosa, you're into it. Rosa Corey's with us today. Rosa's presentation fits. People might wonder why we've got UN Agenda 21 and education together. They fit, just, they cannot be separated. So we're going to have Pat Huff. He's going to talk about farewell to this wonderful little school that had all its books removed from the library and the computers put in instead. It ripped the community apart. And Pat will be talking about that. And then for teachers, Thomas Sticht, who was with William Spady, very important man with Skinner, Mastery Learning, et cetera, and all the kids in the D.C. school district absolutely fell apart. The school fell apart after this program that Spady and Sticht put in. And the Washington Post in 1987 paraphrased Sticht's comment, and it follows. It says, many, and think of this in terms of the corporations that are running our whole life now and want all the charter schools. They're putting in all their horrible charter schools. He said, many companies have moved operations to places with cheap, relatively poorly educated labor. What may be crucial, they say, is the dependability of a labor force and how well it can be managed and trained, not its general educational level. Although a small cadre of highly educated, creative people is essential to innovation and growth. Ending discrimination and changing values are probably more important than reading in moving low-income families into the middle class. Now, you could say that's not just Thomas Sticht. That's the whole philosophy of the corporate sector and the change agents in education, all of whom are working out of the UN Office of Economic Cooperation and Development, World Bank. This is what we're looking at. We are considered nothing but insects to those people. They will run the world. They will absolutely control us with the computer. If that quote doesn't send chills up your back, I don't know what will. Now, for teachers there, I also wrote, Soviets in the Classroom, America's Latest Education Fad, which was also boycotted. All these books I wrote were boycotted by the conservative movement across the country. Back to Basics Reform, written in 1985 when I got out of the department, only 39 pages. That was boycotted. Phyllis Schlafly, every group, LaHaye, you name it, boycott Charlotte. Then came, I thought, well, I did 39 pager, I'm going to do a 700 pager now. So I did, boycotted again. They first said they couldn't understand Back to Basics. It was the 30, and Cindy Weatherly told me that the butcher down the street in Georgia had read it and said, I think that I understand that book just fine. Right? So anyway, then I wrote Soviets in the Classroom. They didn't understand that either. It took 4 years to get that out. Robert Morris, a great judge from New Jersey who had been an investigator in the Congress of the communism in the schools, he became the head of America's Future. And I tried to get America's Future to publish it. No, 4 years after I wrote it, Morris found it in a drawer. He called me, he said, Charlotte, what's this? Soviets in the Classroom, America's Latest Education Fad. That was all about Reagan's agreement with Gorbachev to merge the two education systems. And so he published. I'm just telling you how complete the boycott of our people has been when someone like Robert Morris, a judge from New Jersey, who had been involved in the hearings about communism in the schools in the 50s and 60s, he did not know. And we paid $5,000. Our little group, I think some of these people here, $5,000 to put an ad in the Washington Times, full page on exactly what the agreements were all about. Carnegie Corporation, Velikov, signing agreements with the Soviet Academy of Science to develop computer software for critical thinking for first graders with the Soviets. Thank you. That's really good stuff. So anyway, I'm going back and forth on this in a bit because I want to connect things for you in your mind. And now for teachers there, I'm going to read you something that has bothered me for years. This is a high-up change agent, outcome-based ed journal in 1990. And his name is John Hillary. This was devoted to a discussion of outcome-based education and the problems associated with its implementation. This is for teachers. Okay. Teachers, administrators, and community resistance. This outcome-based ed published a remarkable article entitled Paradigm Change, More Magic Than Logic by John C. Hillary. The reader, you all should remember that the manipulation of classroom teachers and administrators discussed in this article is standard operating procedure in most schools undergoing restructuring. And I want to thank every teacher in America, every public school teacher in America. I've completely changed my whole thinking about public school teachers. There's some that are very far left, very rotten. They haven't gotten into that. Maybe they've even joined the conservatives now because if Arne Duncan is in with the left, okay, fine. With the right, they have. But the majority of them have kept what I have been talking about today with Skinner, the absolute lifelong use of operant conditioning on all of us for the totalitarian society. They have kept that from happening behind closed doors. And I want to thank them. It should have happened shortly after I was fired from my job in the department for leaking the document that talked about technology. It should have happened around then. They were planning on putting the system in. So they were very successful, these public school teachers who don't dare say anything and they hide. And a lot of them have resigned, gotten out. Some are hanging in because they've got, whatever their job, and it was over with. But we're going to read this. This is what they've gone through. And a lot of it comes out of the National Training Labs in Bethel, Maine, which is the #1 laboratory set up in this country in the right after World War II, okay, National Training Labs. This is for sensitivity training, breaking people down, weekly retreats all over the world now. I know a friend of mine worked in the Bank of Brussels about 20 years ago. She told me when I showed her my little book, Back to Basics, Reform, and she said, oh, Charlotte, this is in the bank. She said, I have to go for training every Friday afternoon, and I hate it. So what we're talking about today is not just school, it's banks, it's corporations, total quality management, it's all that. So Hillary says in this article, the deeper changes that frustrate leaders and threaten followers are planned second-order changes. These changes intentionally challenge widely shared assumptions, disintegrate the context of organization, and in general reframe the social system. This in turn generates, for the poor teachers, widespread ambiguity, discontinuity, anxiety, frustration, confusion, paranoia, cynicism, and anger, as well as temporary dysfunction. Such trauma often builds to the point that leaders abandon their efforts. Hooray! You know, we got that change agent. He's going out of town. Out. Lock him up. Lock all of them up. I mean, they put a guy down in D.C. who steals a television to pay for drugs in jail for 5 years. And John Goodlad and all these people, I called for them all being locked up at the Protection of People Rights Amendment hearings in 1984. Public testimony. I said, lock them up. No, they just get paid more and more money. These horrible people destroying our children, our economic system, our whole country, and they get paid. Our money, huh? All right, so such trauma often builds to the point that the leaders abandon their efforts, not often enough. The most disruptive changes, second-order changes, on the other hand, call into question the entire context of organization. Such multidimensional changes not only challenge the content of each domain, but also disrupt the alignment among them. Paradigm change is therefore not only traumatic in and of itself, you know, why do these people write these things up? They're so sure of themselves, but also challenges other attributes and disintegrates the relationship among all domains. The eventual outcome of such change is transformed or renewed organization. The new vision for schooling suggested by contemporary educators represents a significant second-order challenge to school organization. The leader of planned second-order change will be regarded as out of context by the organization. If he thinks and behaves in accord with a vision that requires second-order changes, he has no choice but to violate or challenge the established culture, mission/purpose, and paradigm of the organization. From the existing frame of reference, such behavior will be seen as illogical. Powerful and pervasive psychosocial forces will bear down on the renegade in a relentless organizational effort to bring him back into alignment. Unless the leader succeeds in progressively bending the pervasive frame, persistence is increasingly risky. During second-order change, the organization must face and hopefully pass through a period of widespread psychological ambiguity, social disconnectedness, and general confusion. This guy really repeats himself too, huh? The requisite disintegration of the existing culture, mission, purpose, and paradigm disrupts the organization's frame of reference. During this time, there is little or no clear and consistent context to guide the thinking and behavior of members. In social systems, this condition produces dysfunction, anxiety, frustration. He keeps doing this. The instigator of second-order change must consistently behave in ways that will not make sense when framed by the existing context. With time and leadership, the organization environment must move from initially and naturally selecting against the innovation to selecting for the innovation. The extinction of the old way of doing business is the desired outcome. Hence, and with time, the risk should gradually shift away from the innovator and toward those who persist in holding on to the way it has always been. Now look, you can apply that, not just education. That is across the board. That is the attack on the individualist American, their conscience, their soul, everything. When I was a school board member in Camden in 1976, I was taking very strong stands on things like, you know, basic academic education, all these dumb programs that have education hanging off the end of them, like drug ed, death ed, sex ed. And they're all geared to change the children's values. All these programs that sound so good I mean, well, hey, wait a minute. If you show kids all about sex, you show them all about booze and drugs and everything, they want to try it. And so the programs did just the opposite and were geared to do so. And I have proof in my book from the Guidance Counselor's Journal saying that those programs were geared to do just exactly what I said. Now, anyway, so I get a call from a retired teacher, a master teacher, lives in our community. She said, I really like the stand you're taking on these things. You seem to understand what's going on, but I don't think you understand one thing. I want to pay for you to go for some training up in Searsport, Maine to become a change agent. And I said, what? And she said, well, you'll find out. So up I go. She pays me $100. That was a lot back in 1976. I go up, and to make a long story short, the facilitator whose program came out of the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and was funded by the office I would subsequently be working in at the U.S. Department of Ed. He had his big book, which we all got a copy of it, that thick, case studies of how to get these resisting parents to accept these wretched programs coming out of the National Diffusion Network. The whole country was being immersed in these programs out of 1965 that had nothing to do with education. We were taught by him to identify the resistors in the community. So I just went, I just lived around, gone around the world, Vietnam, North Korea, China, that sort of thing. I'd talk to people, refugees out of those countries. They talked about their grandfather having his head cut off when he resisted the regime in Vietnam. Chinese woman, her grandfather was a pianist during the Cultural Revolution, hands cut off, resisting. And here I'm being taught to identify the resistors in my community. Of course, being taught to identify myself was enough. We were taught to identify the important people in the community. Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, Garden Club, you name it. Go to them, tell them these programs are so necessary, and get them on your side. So I wanted definitely to mention this to all of you. It is terribly important. It's important to go overseas because Hong Kong, look at those parents there. How come they can resist and revolt in Hong Kong against what the Chinese Communist regime, which they're unfortunately under now, but you read about that, didn't you? The parents are all out in the street because they don't want the Chinese Communist curriculum. Don't forget, we're getting the Chinese Communist curriculum. Don't forget what Beth Trotto told me way back when the community educator answered the question from the other community educator, what is it you're talking about? What can you compare this to? And the community educator answered, this is a conference with 1,000 of these guys there and girls, said, the system is communist Chinese. That's back in 1975 or something. This is Chinese communism that they're putting in. It's Russian too, they copied it from the Russians. So I just wanted to talk about the change agent thing because it's very important, and you're all resistors and you've all been identified, and so you ought to tell your friends that when they come, to try to get your friends on board or change their mind, this is a good case study of where it came from. Out of the University of Michigan, U.S. Department of Ed funded, still being funded. I do believe that I didn't even use my speech, I never do, but I think that I pretty much planned, I never do, it's right here. But I think that I have covered it better than what I wrote down, basically. When I get on my horse, I do that. Someone passed me a quote the other day that I lost, which is where I don't lose them often, but it was from Tolstoy. And the quote said that the most really intelligent, practical people who get ahead in life and make an effort and have their own livelihood, etc., they're usually not highly educated. And I've come to that same conclusion. I think that these professors and all at the top tell us what to do. No, we've got to understand that we have been given by God a great intellect, all of us. We know what's right, we know what's wrong. And we know we have a responsibility, we do, not just to the children ahead in our own country, but I say that's why this is called global. I want all the people out there to understand the role, I'm sorry to have to apologize to you, of the United States in promoting this agenda all over the world. OBE is everywhere. The school to work is everywhere. Of course, they've had it. Many of them are communist socialist countries anyway. Our education system, and I saw it, I saw all the grants going out all over the world. I was really upset. And so I want the people who are watching this disc, and I hope it will be widespread, to understand this is our last stand as human beings, individuals with a conscience. Because as Dustin Houston said, it's a quote I almost forgot, it's a good one to close with, in regard to computer-assisted teaching. Did I say it? I'll say it again. The head of World Institute for Computer-Assisted Teaching. Won't it be wonderful when the child in the most remote area of the country or world can have the benefit of the world's finest psychologists, these are people I was talking about, on that computer, and nobody can get between the child and the computer. Thank you very much.